Hello, good evening. Good evening. My name is Zindika Kamusi. I am an author, teacher, speaker, meditation and mindfulness practitioner, and an EFT and energy balancing practitioner. I am also the host of the Thursday night book club for the MNPC, which is the Mindfulness Network for People of Color. And welcome to the Thursday Night Book Club. So we're here for the second of our 2024 program, and we have a special guest at this event this evening, James Rowe, who will be speaking with you shortly. But before James speaks, we always start with a moment of calm. Yes, a moment of calm, so you can gather your thoughts and be open to receiving this new work from James with knowledge, information, and it's all about sharing and caring. So let's just get ourselves into a relaxed position this evening so we can drop briefly into a moment of connecting with our breath and connecting with our self, particularly with dropping into our inner self. So let's just settle into the meditation and let's just settle into the breath. And as you settle into the breath, just allow the breath to flow in and out of your nostrils. Be here and now. As you allow that breath to flow in and out, you'll be here in the now. It brings you immediately, as you connect to the breath, it brings you to the present moment, brings you to the present time. So just take that breath in, just follow the flow of your own breath in and out. And as you take those breaths in, let's just take in 3 breaths, and then we're going to count each breath, and we're going to be thinking calm. So let's take in a nice big breath in and out, and just think calm. And just see what that feels like. What does it feel like? How does it feel in the body? And let's take in another breath, the second breath of these 3. Take in another breath and be thinking calm. So be thinking to yourself, calm. And again, just see how that feels in the body. And just be telling your body, calm, calm, calm. And notice how you're feeling. And take in 3 breaths, 3. Nice big breath in. And just be thinking, telling yourself, calm. And again, just see how that feels. And just allow all that tension, any mind chatter to just dissolve and just to be replaced with calm, as that chatter, and that sometimes you get so much noise going around in the mind. Just disperse it with calm and allow that calm to come in. Telling yourself to be calm, to be open, to be relaxed as we go into this evening's presentation. So breathe in with a sigh out. Breathe in and sigh out. One more time, breathe in and sigh out. And just one more time for 3. Breathe in and sigh out. And then gradually, let's just come back to the space, feeling calm and relaxed. And now that we are feeling calm and relaxed, let's continue with this evening's presentation. And welcome to those people who have joined us, just as we started into that brief practice. Welcome to this evening's Thursday Night Book Club. And we've got a special guest this evening with us. His name is James Rowe. And I just want to say a few brief words about James from his bio. And then, James, you can take it away and tell us some more. So, James Rowe is an associate professor of environmental studies and cultural, social, and political thought at the University of Victoria. And James, where is Victoria? Just to be precise, you told me, but just to tell the audience.
Victoria is on the southern tip of Vancouver Island, which is on the west coast of Canada, and so the metropolises that are nearest by are Seattle and Vancouver.
Right. Yeah. Wow. So thank you, James. So his research program is motivated by a desire to understand and strengthen social movements working towards social and ecological justice. James has published a few journals, including a few of these, for example, the New Political Science, Socialist Studies, Studies in Political Economy, and his research has been reported on UK's very own BBC, the CBC, and HuffPost, and a few others. But James, you can tell us some more. So let me start with a question. You're about to tell us about your book, Radical Mindfulness. So can you tell us what radical mindfulness is and how we can be more radical in a mindful way? Welcome, James.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that intro and that beautiful meditation, and thanks to Zindika and the Mindfulness Network for People of Color for hosting this conversation, and William for the invite, and to all of you for spending some of your time here. It's wonderful to be here with you. And so, yeah, in terms of radical mindfulness, there's sort of two meanings associated for me. One, well, first of all, radical comes from the Latin radix, which means root, and so getting to the root of the problem. And so for me, as I'll maybe talk about more today, think that a root cause of injustice that hasn't received the attention that it deserves is existential fear about our finite existence on this planet. And we need practices for being able to metabolize our existential fear. And indeed, that's one of the roles of meditation historically in the Buddhist context, is to help with that effort. And there is wonderful efforts afoot right now of integrating mindfulness into social change efforts. And I interviewed a number of activists as part of this work. And they talked a lot about the way that mindfulness can help address the sort of causes of injustice, or the effects of injustice, whether it's trauma or burnout, and that's also important. And yeah, something I wanted to sort of highlight with this book is that I think mindfulness can actually not just address the effects of injustice, but can actually address the causes as well. It can help metabolize some of the fears that I think can aggregate and generate what I call a will to supremacy, or what Martin Luther King Jr. called a drum major instinct, a kind of desire to be better than other people, basically rooted in anxieties about being small in the face of this massive existence that will one day gobble us up. And so that's one of the meanings of radical mindfulness, is mindfulness practices that target some of our existential anxieties and help to metabolize them. And then the other meaning, though, is that, while Buddhist communities, for instance, are well attuned to the role of existential fear in shaping ego and ego inflations and all the problems that those can cause, Buddhist communities and other mindfulness practitioner communities aren't always attuned to the role of political structure in shaping how we are in the world. And so another meaning of radical mindfulness for me is mindfulness practices that are deployed in a context that's attentive to how we as individuals are not the sole authors of our existence. We are shaped by systems and structures that we need to be targeting if we want to address some of the fundamental problems that we face. And so for me, radical mindfulness is both addressing some of the sort of root embodied fears that don't always get the attention they deserve from social movements and political philosophers. But then also it's kind of a call for those in mindfulness communities to consider more the systems and structures. And so my basic argument is that we need to integrate mind-body practices into social movements that themselves are already targeting those systems and structures so that we can better address all the different drivers of injustice. So that's my opening nutshell.
Yeah. Okay. So I take it that you practice mindfulness yourself, and yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I've been practicing Buddhist meditation for 20 years now, and yeah, I have, uh, as one of the teachers that I learned from pointed out, I practice in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and Tibetans are very practical people. They wouldn't be doing this exercise for hundreds of years if it didn't have some value, and that's definitely been my experience as well, which is what keeps me doing it, and I've personally found it of incredible value for not only my personal life but also my political life as well. So being able to stay in the fight and stay resourced.
Hmm.
James, I have a question. I'm going to throw you in the deep end.
Please.
Can you tell us your views on the approaching election in the US? I mean, what
Oh,
do you make
wow.
of the whole thing? Sorry to throw you in the deep end.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's going to be a wild ride, for sure. Yeah, it's a curious situation where I don't think anyone, well, that's not true. A number of Republicans obviously love Donald Trump, but in terms of the general population, I think people are pretty disappointed in both of their choices. And so it's a hard election to get super excited about, given that, the Democrats are talking about Donald Trump as a sort of existential threat to democracy in the United States, and yet they're running a frankly pretty poor candidate against him, Joe Biden, who not only and it's not about age necessarily, because I know lots of people in their 80s who are very, very sharp, but I think that everyone's witnessing a little bit of a slowdown for Mr. Biden, and it's not particularly inspiring. But then also executing or sort of playing uh, supporting a genocide in Gaza is horrible, and he's losing a lot of electoral support because of that from not only Arab Americans, but a majority of Americans want a ceasefire, and the government's not delivering it. So anyhow, I do think the polls right now show a strong likelihood of a Trump victory, which is very dispiriting. But politics, a month is a long time in politics, and we've still got a year until that. Well, actually, no, we don't. We've got like 7 months until the election, so we'll see. We'll see. But definitely not inspiring choices.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, James. Jumping in there, the politics of America. Okay. Okay, so who your book, Radical Mindfulness, who mostly do you think it will help? Who is it
Yeah.
aimed at?
Yeah, it's a good question. It is an academic book. I tried to write it in as accessible and engaging a way as possible, but there's just no hiding from the fact that it is an academic book where I think I start talking about Hegel by page two. It doesn't take me long to get pretty nerdy fast. But I think that the sort of audiences that the book are addressed to would be that, if there's comrades that in politics who have their doubts about the value of mind-body practice, this book is sort of an effort to really make the concrete case that these practices are not just a sort of nice sideshow, a side benefit to politics. They're actually integral to achieving a lasting justice, is the argument I make in the book. And there's a long history of skepticism of spirituality on the left. Marx referring to religion as sort of the opiate of the masses, and there's understandable reason for that position. And yet, I think that skepticism has maybe blocked people from on the left from matters of the heart and matters of the spirit that are so central to not only system transformation but internal transformation. The way those two are connected. But then the book is also, I think, helpful for people in mindfulness communities that might not be, again, attentive to the role of systems and structures. And so just as an example, I share the story of Maha Prajapati in the book, which is the Buddha's aunt who raised him after his mother died a week after the Buddha was born, according to the stories. And in that story, the Buddha achieves enlightenment, and a couple of years after that, Mahaprajapati sees the wonderful benefits that the Buddha's experienced from enlightenment, along with his monastic community, and asks if she can join the Buddha's monastic community, along with some other women who she's representing, they've lost family members to his monastic community. And they want to join, and they want to receive the benefits. And the Buddha says, after enlightenment, no, you're not allowed in. And Mahaprajapati basically organizes this is anachronistic, but it's pretty easy to classify what she organizes like a feminist protest march, where the Buddha goes on a teaching tour and she follows him. She dresses up in monastic robes, and her and a group of women follow him along the route. And as the story goes, at one point, the Buddha's advisor, Ananda, runs into Mahaprajapati and sees that she's quite upset, asks why. She explains that she wants in. And Ananda finally has a conversation with the Buddha and says, are women not capable of enlightenment? And the Buddha says, no, they are. And then Ananda says, did Mahapajapati not devote huge amounts of her labor to allowing you to live by basically providing all this mothering labor to you? And the Buddha's like, oh yeah, she did. And so Ananda's like, well, maybe you should let her in. And so finally the Buddha relents. And what's useful about this story to me is it demonstrates that even after enlightenment, even after the Buddha is this enlightened being, wasn't able to see that inclusion was the right choice, and that he was born at a time in northern India where patriarchal conditions were afoot. And so he was structured by those conditions. And without targeting those conditions, they were still living in his body, even post-enlightenment. And so it required a protest on the behalf of Mahapajapati to achieve that level of inclusion. And yet the story also indicates that the Buddha was able to sort of come to see the light and cut against the grain of his time by choosing an inclusive outcome. And I think that his enlightenment helped with that non-defensive outlook. But anyways, that story helps demonstrate to me the importance of both mind-body practices to undo our defensive orientations, but then also coupling it with protest to be able to challenge some of those systems and structures that live inside of our bodies. If we're not addressing them, we can do our 30 minutes of meditation, but then we're out in the world where we're being impacted again by these different systems and structures shaping us in ways that might not be generative. And so that's why we have to be working on both fronts.
Yeah. Okay. So do you think there's any conflict between that and politics? You know, when you use mindfulness, that mindfulness is all about calming the mind, the body, and integrating with yourself, your higher self. That there's any conflict with that and what you might call this everyday politics happening around us?
Yeah, I think there's definitely tensions. Like I think that I think politics can get conducted more effectively if we're coming at it from a grounded and calmed, non-defensive position, like you helped us with at the beginning of this presentation, Zindika. That was a lovely way to get to begin a talk, to be calmed. That's the right orientation. Um, and yet at the same time, in politics, there is some level of conflict that's unavoidable, some level of challenging power. And so, and one thing I've witnessed within spiritual community is sometimes a too fast move to universalism, so a too fast move to a collective humanity, which is so vital. We have to hold both at the same time. We have to hold our common humanity, but we have to recognize that some humans might be behaving poorly and they have to be questioned and they have to be targeted. And so, in the United States, there is this movement, Occupy Wall Street, that came up with the slogan of the 99% versus the 1%, which is like a pretty effective articulation of how there's these hyper elites that have a significant concentration of wealth that is detrimental to the rest of us, and they should be targeted. And while that happened, there were a number of people in spiritual communities that were kind of arguing, well, what about the 100%? We should speak about humanity. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that, again, some level of agonism or some level of conflict is internal to politics, and we can't really do away with that if we want to challenge concentrated power. But we need to do so while holding, again, the humanity of those that we're challenging in our minds, so that we don't basically replicate cycles of violence. And so I think there are tensions between mindfulness and politics, but I think they really can complement each other. And I think that politics is done better if it's integrated with mindfulness. And I'll just share one example from my research. There's an environmental justice organization called Stand.Earth that do work on climate change and forestry, and they start all of their meetings with 12 minutes of meditation, all their board meetings with 12 minutes of meditation, and encourage their employees to have a regular practice. And the assumption is that time spent connecting with ourselves will then help us better connect with others, will make the meeting time more effective. And then also in the work that people at Stand.Earth do with their allies and also with their opponents, that coming to that work with a non-defensive orientation, because of that calming work that's been done internally, can achieve better outcomes. And so yes, I think there's some tensions, absolutely, but I think that they can work well together. That's my hope. That's my argument.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just I'll give the audience an opportunity to ask a question or two, James. But just one question here would be, how do you think it, as this is this Thursday Night Book Club is part of the mindfulness for network of people of color, how do you think it can be used, your work can be used by people of color, and how could they get started with that?
Yeah, so I think that for me, again, that one of the big motivations of this book was wanting to understand why oppression keeps happening. So example I share in the book is that colonialism in my part of the world, in North America, started 530 years ago when Columbus encountered the Arawak people in what's the Bahamas now, and so that's a long time ago. That kickstarted a brutal colonial process, and yet just last year, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada were removing Indigenous people from their land at gunpoint to make way for a natural gas pipeline. And so these underlying colonial dynamics that are rooted in racism persist, like year after year after year. And so wanting to understand, so basically like dominator subjectivity, it so happens that and again, my part of the world, the people who have done a lot of the dominating, whether along axes of race, class, gender, are folks that look like me or white people. And so, in some respects, the work involves a bit of an anthropology of white people, and to speak really generally. And as a white person myself, I am positioned to do some of that and to sort of be able to look inwards and see some of the ways that these patternings have showed up within my own organism. And the way that mind-body practices have helped to digest them, and so that's part of the work. What I found in the research, though, in terms of my focus on the role of existential fear in shaping a kind of will to supremacy, my basic argument is that if we don't have cultural resources for dealing with big fundamental existential questions around life and death, it's really easy to feel small and terrified as a human being on this planet. And if we don't have stories and then mind-body practices for embodying some of those more affirmative stories about a world that ultimately involves our death, it's easy for us to compensate for those feelings of smallness by imposing ourselves on other beings, both human and non-human. And part of the argument is that Euro-American folks have lacked those resources for that metabolization of existential fear, which is one explanation for why they've behaved in the nasty way that they have. It isn't necessarily original sin or something fundamentally wrong with people of my background, but it's a part of it is a lack of cultural resources for dealing with these big questions. And this is an argument that in part of what I do in the book is look at a number of different people and different philosophical traditions who have made a version of this argument, both white folks, but also folks of color, people like James Baldwin, or John Mohawk, who's a Haudenosaunee scholar who is a focus of one of the chapters. And so there's some consensus among people who have both been harmed by folks who what Audre Lorde calls resemble what Audre Lorde calls the mythical norm, white folks like myself. So both people who have been harmed by those dynamics, and then also those who are operating from that subject position have pointed to this role of existential fear in shaping a compensatory will to supremacy that then causes such havoc. And so part of what I wanted to do in the book is to kind of collect all the different ways that different thinkers have made that argument and put them all together into one book, so that we can take that argument more seriously and have a conversation about it. And in terms of sort of what this might offer to folks of color, like the hope would be that it offers some clarity around why white supremacy has been so persistent, and then offering some pathways for how that can then be fundamentally transformed. And so that's the hope with the offering.
Okay, great, thank you. So we're coming up to the end soon of the session, and I just think we've got space for a couple of questions from the audience. Has anyone got any questions that they would like to ask James, maybe based on what you've heard? Or any comments? Would anyone like to share anything at this moment? Any questions? No?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for all you've said and shared. The book sounds really interesting. You said that it was an academic book. Does that mean that there aren't practices within it to actually kind of go away and
yeah, so it is, I admit in the introduction that it is a bit more of a theoretical book where I'm making an argument about why mind-body practices matter, versus it being a kind of how-to guide. That said, share a number of different practices in the book, introduce people to a number of different both stories, but also mind-body practices and rituals. And it gets nuanced in that a number of the practices I share are indigenous practices that aren't ones that I, for instance, am able to do unless I'm invited to do by the indigenous folks. So one example is the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address, which is this absolutely beautiful oration that the Haudenosaunee used to open all of their social gatherings and political gatherings, where they go through and thank all the elements of creation, and it's sort of meant to cultivate a deep gratitude for earthly life, despite the fact that we, of course, all end up feeding the earth literally at the end of our lives. And so it's a practice that I can write about because other Haudenosaunee folks have written about it in a public way. But again, it's not one that I can just start doing. That becomes cultural appropriation. And so what I talk about in the book is about how, for me, Buddhism is a really powerful set of tools and practices for those people who have been disconnected from their ancestral traditions. I think if we look far enough back, I would argue that I think most people have earth honoring traditions in their ancestral lines if we go far enough back. And so for me, this would be about going back into like some Celtic paganism. I think if we look far enough back, we can find that. But I've been disconnected from those ancestral traditions through colonialism and then my experience as a settler here in North America. And I think Buddhism is a really powerful tradition for people who've been disconnected from their ancestral traditions. It's a missionary religion, which means that practitioners have sought people to practice the techniques. One thing that's unique about Buddhism, contrary to Christianity perhaps, is that it hasn't necessarily been about making more Buddhists. It's been about getting the word out and having more people metabolize their existential fear and quiet their ego is the sort of ultimate goal. So anyways, in the book, I do talk about my Buddhist journey, and I talk about Buddhist practices that are available for all people, as long as they're done in a way that honor that Buddhist tradition. They can still be done in a secular context, of course. And so I am thinking that my next project will be more of a kind of hands-on type guide, but this one is a bit more theory.
Thank you. And I resonate with what you say about Buddhism and my journey with it being disconnected and reconnecting to something. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Any more? One more?
I can add something. Hello,
Okay,
I'm
that's
coming
Teresa.
here. Yes, hello. I'm coming here because I'm part of the board of IAMBA, the European Association of Mindful-Based Approaches, and thank you for your sharing, James. Well, my ancestors, I'm Italian. So, and I embraced Buddhism when I was 20, and also coming away from an understanding of myself that, of course, I was raised within the Christian tradition, and the idea of the original sin, and that seed that was implanted that there is something wrong with me. So that sense of inner scarcity, and I need redemption, and I need that, so that I don't know, I can take it maybe further out. You talk about existential fear, but the colonialism is embedded in Christianity, and the idea that human beings are scarce, and that is then you need to I don't know, somehow is that as well. I think it's a combination, of course, of things, but this idea that there is scarcity within me, and I need to have more and more and more and more, and probably is another component as well of all this. I don't know, just an idea.
Oh yeah, no, I really appreciate that point, Teresa, and I completely agree. In the Bible, Saint Paul talks about how, I think the phrase is, the wages of sin are death, and the point is that because of our original sin in the Garden of Eden, we're punished through mortality. Like, mortality is our punishment, death is our punishment. And there's a way that with that and with original sin, we're, I think, encouraged to see ourselves, as you say, as being lacking and having a basic scarcity, and that there's something wrong with us as these fleshly, finite beings that are being punished for our sinfulness in the Garden of Eden. And so, for me, I think that feeds into what the Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa calls a sort of basic anxiety that pervades our life, is this sense of, it feeds into that sense of scarcity, and or they're connected. And what Trungpa encourages is for us to, through mindfulness practice, to begin embodying what he calls our basic goodness, which is a variant on Buddha nature, but it's a very powerful antidote to that deep shame and feeling of scarcity that comes from the doctrine of original sin that so many of us with Christian inheritances, even if we didn't grow up with a super devout and in a super devout family, that narrative about our scarcity and our lack and there being something wrong with us as fleshly beings, that runs so deep in Euro-American culture, and I think that's a major source for the fear, and then the fact that we're not able to effectively metabolize it, we're not able to transform it to the basic goodness because we don't have the resources to do it, and because we don't have the resources to do it. That fear and anxiety very quickly, I think, feeds into a compensatory will to supremacy that is designed to make us feel a little better about ourselves. If we can impose ourselves on other beings and on other people, then maybe we're not as shameful as we think, And the philosopher Hegel, so I mentioned him, who was an influence for Marx and Frantz Fanon. He refers to death as the absolute master, which is to suggest that like we're slaves to it, and so I think that sort of framing of death as what St. Paul calls an enemy or as a slave feeds into our feelings of unworthiness and shame and scarcity that we need to address, because I think that those anxieties help to inform a compensatory will to supremacy that wreaks havoc in the world. So anyhow, that's very resonant with where I land. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. So therefore, embrace also Buddhism as which is the opposite. We are born, perfect. We are, our nature is inherently good, and then there is a lot of confusion and a lot. So how to embrace the practices to wake up from that illusion of inner unworthiness. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Teresa. Thank you, James. Tell us a little bit about where people can get more from you or get in contact with you, or tell us more about your book, how they can get hold of your book.
Well, again, I sent Zindika the electronic copy of the book. You're more than welcome to distribute that, Zindika, and so you can have that for free. The book itself, because it is an academic book, is not particularly affordable, unfortunately. I think it retails at like $45 American. I did send a 20% discount code, Zindika, maybe that you could share with people who registered, if people who want to get a hard copy. But the ebook is for free, so you're welcome to access it that way. And then for me, I'll just throw my email in the chat. If anyone wants to get a hold of me, I'd love to carry on the conversation. Absolutely.
Yes, yeah, do that. Yeah. You drop
Peter
your
had a
details in
question.
the
Peter,
chat.
did you have a question?
We've got one more question before we close.
Oh, no. No, thanks, William. No, I was just going to say, thanks to James, because, he's just, what you said, it's been encouraging to me, because at work, I recently became a member of a union rep. And at first I found it a bit like conflict, like I was experiencing a bit of internal conflict, because I noticed that in some of the meetings with the reps, they're like jostling for positions. And I'm thinking to myself, do I really want to be part of this? And also thinking like of the conflict I'd be having with the managers, like fighting for more pay and other stuff like that. And I thought, because I'm also practicing Buddhism, and I thought I don't really want to be getting involved in kind of like political kind of things. But after hearing you I see that no, it is possible to still continue my practice, and at the same time also being a union rep and also like trying to go for change, trying to make things better for other people. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. That's wonderful to hear that you're balancing those two worlds of union rep and your Buddhist practice, and it'll be cool to see how they inform each other. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really honored
Okay.
you took time out of your day to come and have this chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us and giving us your time. Yeah, and we're sending you our thanks, all of us, and our blessings over there in Canada. And yeah, may you have a really calm evening or day, I should say. Forget your
Wonderful.
stay time.
Thank
Have a
you.
calm day, and we have a calm evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You all as well. Thank you so much. Really
Thanks.
appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.
Zindika, should